Welcome to the Sprocket Pod, your podcast for helpful HubSpot content. I'm Cameron Collins, and alongside my co-host Mark Lerner, we sit down each week with experts on the HubSpot CRM to break down cool builds and unique apps that will make your instance better. Whether you're a new admin or you're a business owner looking to get the most out of HubSpot, our conversations are going to provide you with unique insights that you can apply. Don't forget, we host the Sprocket Pod live on LinkedIn every week, and you can catch all of our episodes on YouTube and Spotify. Let's dive into today's episode and get you working smarter with HubSpot.
Indeed. Welcome to the Sprocket Pod. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am super excited to be wearing my process enforcement shirt today because we are indeed going to be talking about process enforcement. I've got my guest on, Pete. Pete, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining.
Thanks, man. Yeah, this is fun. We don't get to see too much of each other through the week, so it's nice to kind of hang out here.
Yeah, and I know you are really busy working with your pod here at Rev Partners. Go ahead and for those who aren't familiar with what you do and what even we do at Rev Partners, tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, happy to. So I'm a lead strategist at Rev Partners. So that means I get the privilege of caring for a small team or a pod, as we call them here, of strategists, and I'm making sure that they have the access, the resources they need to serve our partners effectively. Prior to joining RP, I've got a background in marketing. Before that, education. And then if you go back far enough, Cameron, I was doing silly things in countries like Nepal and Tajikistan and starting small businesses around fruit drying and mushroom growing and harvesting yak down and things like that. So it's been a wild journey before getting here. I would say, so my proudest achievement is going to be I wrote a fruit drying manual, which was published and is used by, well, it was published by the Afghan and Tajik Ministries of Agriculture, which I think is pretty cool. But here's the kicker: I have no idea if anyone uses it, which is a good segue into where we're going.
Yeah, that is a lovely segue into our theme today. Because the reality is, if you write a book and no one reads it, does it make an impact? And the answer is probably no. So we're going to be talking about adoption today. We're going to be talking about how that impacts HubSpot admin and change management, which can be a big, scary word because change is hard. What is it that, when it comes to adoption, like, why is adoption important to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think in the line of work that we're in, if something's not adopted, there was literally no point in me building it, doing it, or arguing for it in the first place. Like, without adoption, all of our work is redundant, which is a harsh way of saying it, but it's kind of reality. What we do, whether you're in RevOps specifically or you're a HubSpot admin or whatever your job title says, you are a change agent, right? And so your success or your failure depends on successful change and managing that. So we need to figure it out. We have to figure out how to get people to adopt what it is that we've built. So the statistics. There's 50% of CRM implementations fail. And then if you look more broadly at just change management in general, 70% of change management initiatives in the workplace fail. 70%. That's insane when you think about it. Like, you think about the billions of dollars that are thrown at making change happen, and it's not working out because people aren't adopting what is being asked of them.
It's a scary statistic because statistically, half of what we implement is just going to fail outright. And it's not because the workflow didn't work or because we're not good as admin, but it's because there's a very real human and just people element to what we're doing.
Mhm.
And I think that's what makes the difference between a good HubSpot admin and a great HubSpot admin. It's
Mhm.
being able to navigate that people element to the role.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's one of those things that we don't really think about that often, right? It's probably not in your job description. It's probably not something that you wake up in the morning thinking about, but it's one of those skills that if you can nail it, you're gonna go far. It's one of those skills that, I mean, we'll talk about this as we kind of go through today, but there are these different skill sets that is expected but not verbalized for a HubSpot admin, for a RevOps professional. But as you said, it's all about people. It's all about the people.
Who owns change management when it comes to rolling processes and adoption? I know we're
Do you know
diving
what?
right here.
Let's do it. I think if so, invariably no one. Right. That's what happens is nobody's owning the change itself. People are building, people are requesting, and people are implementing, but no one's owning the overarching narrative of change. And so whoever steps up and says, I'm going to own it, that's the person that's going to both change that statistic of 70% fail, but also progress. Like, they're going to be the hero, right? And that's what we want to position our HubSpot admins as, position our RevOps process. They're the heroes. They're the ones that make things happen. So, I think that if you can own it, if you can make yourself accountable, then you're going to be that hero. And I say that I'm gonna give you two examples, Cameron, of like when I was and when I wasn't. And this is, so it speaks to both the macro massive change management, which is the first one when I introduced HubSpot to the company I was at before, and then earlier on in my RevOps career, like what did it look like to change, to introduce a small thing. So before Rev Partners, I worked I worked with a CRM whilst I was in marketing called Act. Have you ever heard of Act?
No,
No.
I mean, I've heard of quite a few CRMs, but never Act.
Right, and it's just it's a legacy software. We're not here to bash things, but it's legacy software. Okay, so
For a reason.
for a reason. So I said to I mean, it was a smaller company I worked at, but I said, look, we need to change this. We need to get off of this into HubSpot. And the reality was that there are some people in the company who agreed with me, and there are some people in the company who didn't agree with me. And so I had some champions and I had some detractors. And what it became was it's like a political campaign, trying to persuade people to agree with me so that we could make that change, right? And it became like, I've got to show you not only that you feel pain, but also that pain that you feel can be solved and will be lessened if we move to HubSpot. And then in this case, the only reason that it worked was because I was able to persuade the CEO, and he had the influence. So I owned the change, but he was the one that owned helping people feel the need and making people comply. Conversely, there was a time when I was asked as a RevOps professional, as a CRM HubSpot admin, to build a new sales process in HubSpot. This is wild. I was given the sales process. I didn't choose what it should be. I didn't make any recommendations. I was told this is the sales process by an outside agency, a consultant. I was asked to train a team that I'd never met, like literally had never had any interaction with them. And when I jumped on the call with them, it was these 5 sales pros. The consultancy wasn't there. The head of sales wasn't there. It was just me and these people that I was telling, okay, everything that you do right now, we're going to rip it up and start again, starting today. And I had this whole like deck that I was going to share with them. We didn't get into that. I was shut down in 5 minutes. It was like, sorry, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? What's happening? No, it's not going to work. I was like, okay, this is the end of the call. We can't do this anymore. Let's go back to basics. So I say that to illustrate a lot of the principles that I'm going to kind of dive into in a second.
I think if we take it to a matter of principle, I liken what we do in HubSpot to artwork. If you have a beautiful piece of art and you love it, you're proud of it, and it sits in your closet, you have a Van Gogh that's in your closet that nobody can see, it's not impacting. If you put it out for display and people are able to see it and admire it, now it has an impact. And so I would liken that to what we do in HubSpot in the sense that if you build a workflow and it's running in the background and the process is not bought into, then the impact is minimal. And that's why you mentioned a really interesting point where you, in your example, had the CEO bought into the change that you were making at that one organization. And I think having champions is a good thing. My hot take is that having a champion for any level of change management is not enough. And rather that we also need an adoption advocate, that singular internal stakeholder or person who is willing to own and put their name on the success of whatever the initiative is. So that's one of the things that I'll ask for at the beginning of an engagement or an epic or project, which is, who's going to be the adoption advocate on this? Who's going to put their name internally on whether this succeeds or fails? And who can I turn to and say, people aren't doing this. You need to work with me to disseminate the messaging.
Yeah. And it's a big risk, isn't it? Because if you put your name to something and it doesn't work, then you're associated with the failure. So it is a risk, especially when it comes to something as large as change management. I love, though, Cameron, just as an aside, that you compared your HubSpot builds to a Van Gogh painting. I would say mine are closer to a Picasso. They're kind of all over the place.
I'm thinking of framing my workflows and then putting them. We'll have them as backings to the office here.
Beautiful.
So change management is a big word. Obviously, like changing people's behaviors is a big task. But really fundamentally, what is it? Are we just talking about getting somebody to buy into a sales process?
Yeah, so it depends who you talk to. And in fact, frankly, if you go to LinkedIn, they'll tell you that change management is dead, because everything is dead when you go to LinkedIn, whether it's cold calling, cold emailing, whatever. But regardless, change management is so there's an organization called ProSci. They tout themselves as the leading change management organization. They'll define it as, and I'll quote this: the application of a structured process and set of tools for leading the people side of change to achieve a desired outcome. So basically, you're going from A to B, and how do you get people from A to B? Right? That's change management is about people. And so I'm going to present to you in a second an adoption framework, and I'm really using adoption and change management interchangeably. Now, technically, adoption is the last piece of change management, but when you start to think in terms of HubSpot, at least, and in terms of technology, adoption is change management, because without it, you change nothing. So I'll just use those interchangeably, really. And yes, so I'm going to show you how I think about adoption and give you a sneak peek into where actually we'll be going. We're going to introduce this internally at Rev Partners in 2025. So do you want to, should we go and have a look at that now? There it is.
Let's do it.
Okay. So at the top in blue here, this is the ProSci ADKAR definition of adoption, and it's really, this is like industry standard, and I have the arrogance to change it and have my own take on it, because everyone has an acronym these days, right? But let's have a look at, so ProSci say that in order to enact change, you have this sequential but not necessarily linear process, which starts with awareness. So making sure people are aware of it, then building desire for it, and then giving people the knowledge about it, the skills to be able to do it, and then reinforcing that, which is a valid framework. I'm not going to sit here and criticize that. I think though is missing a couple of elements, and that's why I have I have it, my own acronym, which is the word adoption itself. So this is where we're gonna live for a little bit. We'll dive into each of these individually, but just to read what's on the screen. Adoption is to articulate the issue that needs to be changed, to discuss it, to go through an onboarding process, to provision, which is to equip, to track the change. That's the piece that's missing here, right? And then to incentivize, optimize, and normalize. And this little pink line here, that represents where the build would be in HubSpot. So the first pieces happen before the build ever happens, and then everything else is about adoption after the build. So let's I don't know whether that's helpful to leave that up while we talk about it or not, Cameron. It's your call. You're the host. I'll let you do what you think is best.
Yeah, well, we can leave it up for a few minutes. I think this is a really cool framework because it addresses the holistic picture of how people actually interact with the systems. It's not just giving someone the opportunity to do something and then saying, well, the training material is there. When you do that, then you might have usage of a new system, but you don't have buy-in on it. It's the difference between having a sales rep understand why a property should be filled in and then making a gated requirement so that they have to fill it in and then they just put NA anyways.
Yeah, exactly. It makes me think of you've probably done this as well, put gated properties in for like closed one reason, and it just gets filled out every time because I am awesome. Okay, well that's not helpful. Anyway, I think so. This is a framework. It's a framework. It's not the framework. It doesn't. There are so many frameworks out there for adoption. Like just Google it. There are a ton. But the point is, pick one and follow it. I think if you're going to be the person who owns the change, who manages the change, who pushes for adoption, so long as you've got a framework and it's helpful and you understand it, then you're good to go. Let's talk about the adoption framework and see what we can see if it's helpful. Right? I think that's the point. Is it helpful or not? So the piece that I want to dig into to start with. So we have articulate and discuss. Articulate, so the A and the D in adoption. Articulate is to explain the change and its benefits clearly, and discuss is to explore potential impacts and opportunities. But that's more importantly, this whole stage before a build is critical because this is where you get buy-in. I have been accused by many people, including my wife, of having ideas, but not sharing them, and then suddenly out of the blue, I'll share this fully baked idea, this perhaps that my wife has never heard a thing about. She's no idea how I got to that idea. She's not been part of the process, and so suddenly I'm asking her to do something, or for our family to make an entire change, or oh yeah, tomorrow we're going on vacation to Switzerland, right? But she's never even heard that we were taking a vacation, you know. My point here is you have to get buy-in ahead of any change if you're going to see people adopt it after the change. According to Forbes, here's another statistic for you. The leading cause of failure of change management programs is poor communication. And then below that, lack of understanding of the why and lack of buy-in. And all of that begins with sharing the why before the build. So I mean, there's this really makes me feel, I get kind of worked up about this because you've probably seen this as well, Cameron. When you're asked to do something and you don't know why, it's demoralizing and it's and you just don't do it, right?
It's frustrating. It's very
Yeah.
frustrating. And you add on the fact that change management, a true change management process, can feel like something that is extending the lifespan of a project beyond what it needs to be. So planning for 3 to 4 weeks compared to a default of let's build and push it out and just adapt. Um, I guess if we're using waterfall terminology, it's that agile methodology versus that waterfall methodology, right? Do we just build and then put it out in a more finalized state, or do we just push out anything and everything as soon as we can? But the
Mm,
problem with moving too quickly is you don't have that articulate and discussion phase that's present here. And I think that does help truly to begin the normalization earlier on, because
mm.
now it's not just building and pushing and then iterating, but you're having at least the conversations around what does this look like? What can this be?
Yeah.
And that's
Oh,
powerful.
absolutely. And I mean, you run into questions like, well, who should be involved in those discussions, and that becomes it almost becomes territorial. Like, who's pushing the change, who wants whose opinion, who should be allowed to have an opinion, which gets silly. I would advocate for anyone who's going to be affected by the change should have a say in the change. And I know that's not practical all the time, but it's an ideal, right? Um, I think it goes a long way. So, but yes.
And for those who are tuned in, we'll be sharing a document, some resources for those who want to help enable change management. We'll potentially preview it here during the show, but having a framework for how you're going to assign roles and responsibilities and having those discussions at the beginning is so much more important, especially because the admin, the RevOps professional, we really are in many ways the center of the business. We cross marketing, sales, service, success, support, all of it. And so having the leadership, executive management buy-in early on and documented, very critical step that I think oftentimes does go overlooked.
Mhm. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that last piece you said there, Cameron, about documenting buy-in. It's a really interesting. It's like having people literally sign off on what's about to happen, right? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's an interesting
And
thought.
a way to flip it that I've started thinking about more recently, and for those who have listened to any number of episodes of our show, or Pete, as you'll know here at Rev Partners, we take a product mindset to how we embrace the CRM.
Mhm.
But many of us at Rev Partners are not classically trained product managers. So it's one thing to say we have a product mindset, and it's another thing to learn um, product marketing methodology, which I've been diving into a little bit more recently.
Awesome.
And one of the things that I've been embracing lately is understanding and discussing and documenting not just the process and the change and what this is supposed to do, but specifically what is the end user experience going to be.
Mm,
And I think
yeah.
that documentation historically for me has not always been at the forefront, whereas having those conversations earlier in the process and getting end user buy-in and feedback for big projects or epics, right? um, for big changes in the CRM, going to those end users and saying, hey, we're planning to make these changes, how would you anticipate this should look? And every
Hmm.
company is going to be different, but having that as a part of this articulate discussion phase before you cross over the pink line into the build has changed many of my epics profoundly.
Yeah. No, that's powerful. I like that a lot. Um, it's and I hear you. Like, there's the how do I build into my own workflows when I'm so eager, I see something and I'm eager to get it done. How do I take a step back, take a breath, slow down, and guarantee or as close as I can to guarantee success by bringing people in before I do anything. So important. It really is. But eventually we get to that build phase, right? We hit here, and then begins the work of documentation in another sense, right? So this is the onboarding and provisioning. So traditionally, knowledge and ability, to make it fit the word adoption, onboard, and provision. What do I mean here? I mean training and equipping. So this is a really important part of adoption. If you push something and just expect it to work, you're naive, and we all know that, right? But how many of us in revenue operations, as HubSpot admins, how many of us actually know how to train? I think that's another one of those skills that is assumed, but is something that we know, we recognize we have to grow in as well, because there is an art. There's probably a science as well, but there is an art to training other people. It is not as simple as pull out a slide deck, run through the slides, log off after an hour, right? There's so much that goes into training, and I just think that anyone who's wanting to grow in their career in this sense also needs to lean into training as well. If you can effectively convey the message that you want, and it's received and understood because you know how to train, then you're going to see much greater adoption and much greater success. So that's one thing I would lean into. Go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
No, I was just saying powerful stuff. It really is, because ultimately change management is a skill, as is the technical side of actually building something.
Right.
And to the points we've made before, you can't just build something and put it out into the world. You have to make sure that people read it, they adopt it, they use it. And so we've talked about documentation. What are some of the ways that, as we go through the position, track, provision phase, how do you enable people to adopt into programs, tools and resources?
Oh man, you've set me up nicely here. I would be very surprised if the tool I'm about to mention hasn't been mentioned on this show before. But if it hasn't, here we go. Supered is hands down the best tool for this, right? It's fantastic for a lot of things. So Supered is, well, I'm gonna butcher it if I try and pitch it, but it is a fantastic way of documenting what you're doing, and then surfacing that documentation in the places in which your team are living. So in HubSpot in particular, and for showing people what to do when they need to know how to do it. That is the provision. That is the P here. And there isn't anything out there that comes close to what Supered can do in this case.
And it's true, because we had conversations on the show around how best to create learning and development documentation, and we went through some surveys, and the studies show that people are truly, now more than ever, multimodal. Some people like to read, some people like video, some people want the how-to guides, and creating documentation that supports all of those different methods of learning. It's a really important piece to the change management, because if you just gate a property and tell someone they need to fill it in, again, you're not going to get quality information. But if you help people understand why a missing property impacts a part of the process and how it impacts them, and then you give them that information through video, GIFs, text, now they can receive it in a way that's impactful to them. And to your point, Super helps to enable all of that.
So true. It is, and I wish that you could just tell someone once, and then they remember and do it. But that's not reality. That's not true for me. I know that much. Certainly not true for my kids. But it's not true. It's not true in our world either, right? And so we help people if we can give them that information again in a place that they can find it and they don't have to go hunt it down. They can just see it in action. Yeah, which is where Super shines.
Well, so here's a hot take question then. Because we're talking about getting people to adopt into a process.
Mm-hmm.
You build you have the articulation, you have the discussion, but what even makes for successful adoption? How do you know if something is successfully adopted? How do you track that?
Yeah.
What's your thought process?
That is a critical question. It's one that you have to answer at the outset. And I don't think that I don't have yet a general definition of success that is consistent, that can be consistently applied, because I think it depends on what you're trying to adopt. But the way I would get there is first identifying the why at the front end, right? Why am I making this change? That's what I'm articulating in the A and discussing in the D, right? Why am I changing it? And then if that means there's an outcome, that means there's a reason. And so the successful adoption is, have I hit that? But then you have to think short term, medium term, and long term, because in the short term, I can get all of my reps to fill in X property. Fine. If they're not doing it in 6 months' time, or even 3 months' time, or even 2 weeks' time, was it actually successfully adopted? No. So it's what's the why? What's my time frame? And then it comes down to how can I track it and how can I track it? So we talk a lot about in all sorts of arenas. We talk about SMART goals. This would be one of those things, right? Is it whether it's a specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, timely, whatever those letters stand for? But one of those is going to be, can I track it? And this is where, again, it becomes specific to the type of change I'm trying to enact, the type of thing I want to get adopted. And that's going to be, and then where do we track that? Ideally, we're tracking in HubSpot, right? Because we're primarily talking about change within HubSpot. And there are, there's various ways that we can measure and various things that we can't measure. So leaning into those we can measure is important. But whether it's like completion rates or views, whether something is used or not used, how long, but then you've got the more subjective and the qualitative measures, like how long does it take me to do that? And I'm only going to know how long it takes someone to do that by asking them, right? I'm only going to know, what is your sentiment behind it? Like, do my end users like doing it? Does it help them? Does it save them time? Does it make them more efficient? Does it improve their quality of work life? And these are questions you have to ask, guys. So that was a rambling response, Cameron, to your question. But yeah, how do you define success? You define it by, does it meet the why? Does it, can you measure it?
And I think that really speaks to understanding just the question of, what does success mean to you, the stakeholder, with regards to this epic or project, and getting them to tell you that and documenting it, and then understanding if the adoption has met that. And there can be ways to quantify it, but I mean, I've been asked simply by one executive, hey, are the other executives bought in that this has been adopted? And then I go to the other executives and they say, well, we're not hearing any issues, so that everything seems fine. And that might be acceptable. But then you might have instances where they say, well, we want to make sure response times have decreased by X or whatever the criteria. There might be quantifiable criteria. So there may or may not always be data behind every single piece of adoption, but as much data as you can document at the outset, super important. And then getting the stakeholder to sign off and say, I understand what's been built. I believe this is adopted. I am bought in. it covers our butts as admin to then be able to turn around 6 months later if there's a question and somebody says, why is this now falling apart? Something must have broken in the adoption process, or something has changed since then. And now we need to ask, was it ever really adopted? And maybe it was. Or has something simply changed since then? Which happens.
Yeah. Yes, it does. All the time.
Now, given that things change, of course, we have the framework that we've been discussing here, and getting the adoption process kicked off, tracking metrics or usage adoption, right, to the best you can with whatever you're rolling out. But then we get into that last step with those 3 blocks, and the first of the 3 being incentivize. I know gamification is a popular word right now, and it's one of the many ways that you can incentivize someone. What are your thoughts on popular ways or effective ways to incentivize someone when it comes to adoption?
I think firstly, just the basic concept of incentivizing someone is it's carrot versus stick, and this is the carrot piece. And I always want to lead with the carrot. The I want to in my role, whatever that might be, I want people to feel rewarded for following a process or adopting whatever, doing something I ask them to do, right? And so gamification of process within HubSpot, I think, is a really interesting idea. But I don't have like specifics. This is how you should do it. I'm learning, and I'm thinking, and I'm discovering. And there are ways, and there are tools, and I would encourage the community to go and kind of find those, because the idea of gamification, it just sounds like, can I apply that to the world of business? Yeah, absolutely you can. Like people are no different just because they're at work, right? And everyone enjoys, well, maybe not everyone, most people enjoy some form of game, right? And I think that there are ways that you can do that within HubSpot to incentivize the behavior that you're looking to enforce. I also think that it's this is where it bleeds over into, RevOps. We cross, as you said, you alluded to earlier, like we work with multiple departments, and we work across marketing, sales, CS, products as well, across the C-suite. It's very rare that you find that you'll start to say, oh, we should be talking to HR or people ops as well. But I think this is where people ops, HR has a role to play. I mean, they have lots of roles to play. Let me be very specific. This is a role that they have a role to play in the adoption process, because they're often the people that will hold the purse strings, or the tools that allow companies to incentivize their teams, right? And so the question I have then is, do you, as an admin or as a consultant or as a RevOps professional, know the relevant people in HR to help with this part? And I think often the answer is going to be no, depending on the size of the organization, depending on what my goals have been previously. But I think that's another thing that I would encourage, is get to know everybody. And maybe we have time later to talk about relationships, but this is another relationship to develop if you're going to help with incentivizing people.
And you mentioned the notion of people potentially enjoying games at work, and I personally, I would make the argument that people would especially appreciate gamification at work, because it makes it less a job that you have to do, that not that everyone doesn't want to do their job, but it makes it potentially more fun.
Yeah.
And I think anytime that you can introduce something that's interesting or amusing or fun to what is otherwise a change in behavior, a change in how you do your job, it helps to reduce the friction and reduce the barrier. So, I mean, I would be a fan of gamification over carrot and stick, but of course, sometimes some companies may just tell their people it's part of your job, you need to do it, but that doesn't create positive change. And I think that that's an important part of what we're talking about here that we have yet to mention and potentially goes under discussed, which is change management isn't just about changing behavior, but it's about changing it for the better with the least amount of friction.
Mm-hmm.
And so ultimately it is change, but it shouldn't feel like a net negative thing for people at any level when it comes to how whatever you're rolling out impacts them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know why someone would change something to make something worse, right? But the
Right.
process of change can often feel like it can often be painful.
Right.
So
Well,
whatever
and
we can make it. So
even to the point of not necessarily making something worse, but something that's just new and
mhm.
having to do something that you just didn't have to be before, that can be painful. I think a common example that we see in HubSpot is many companies that maybe they don't track renewals, for example. And now the executive team wants to track renewals in HubSpot. They're excited. You build a process for renewals, creating them is automated, and the rep only has to do XYZ steps in the process. But whatever it is a net new thing that that rep didn't have to do before. And now maybe they're not excited about that change. So I think the question becomes, how do you, in general, create this change management process and plan in a way that doesn't make people feel like I'm having to do more, but I'm not getting paid more, which oftentimes is the sentiment.
Just pay them more, Cameron. That's the answer, right?
That's always the answer here. And they look at the RevOps guys. We're going to make more money from this, so we can afford that, right?
Yeah. No, I mean,
Always
you're
the
spot
answer.
on. And I mean, there is what we're outlining here is a framework, and there's so much nuance to it. And it's so different for whoever's doing it, different situationally, different by company, different by time, different by who's involved. But I think if you can nail the incentivizing piece, you're onto a winner. The challenge then becomes, how do we keep this going? So we talked about timeframes. There's the next letter. So we've done adoptee. Now we want the O in the end, right? Adoption. So the O is is optimize. And by this, I mean, are you creating a feedback loop? Because we know, as much as we don't want to admit it, we know that what we do first time round is going to have holes, is going to have flaws, is not going to be perfect. And it can be quite tempting to walk away and say, I did my best. I don't want to keep going. I don't want to keep doing this. I want to move on to the next thing. And that pressure could be internal or external. Very often you're being asked as a HubSpot admin or RevOps professional, what's next? Get to that. Let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this. We've got these goals. We need to get to the next one. And this is where we become unpopular, because what we need to do and we need to get better at doing is slowing things down. And nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that. Nobody's we're not incentivized to go slow. But this is one of those cases where if you have to slow down if you're going to get full adoption, and if it's going to be a success in the long run. So that's by slowing down. What I mean is, are we giving the people who are enacting the change, are we giving them the time to trial it, to absorb it, to understand it, and then to give feedback on it? Because there is inevitably going to be some feedback, and not all of it is going to be positive, but all of it's valuable, and we should be taking into consideration. Maybe some of it we disagree with, and maybe some of it will never lead to change, but there's inevitably some change that has to happen. There's inevitably a revisiting of whatever is being built. That's why we talk about product over project, right, at Rev Partners, because there are iterations, there are feature releases, and those feature releases, like if we're talking pure product, come as a result of customer feedback. In our worlds, as admins and in HubSpot, that feedback comes from the end user saying this works, this doesn't work, and this is why, and this was what I'd like. But if you're going to listen to it, you got to go slower.
And you mentioned we're not incentivized to go slower. We are implicitly incentivized to be efficient. And the two are different in the sense that if you set expectations from the beginning, you're going to be more likely to win in your role. Whereas if you just build, you're taking orders, you're making changes, you're moving fast, you might be delivering what they're asking for, but you're not delivering what the business or the executives need. And as that RevOps professional, oftentimes finance tends to, I think, get railed on as being the not so fun part of the company. But I think that as RevOps professionals, it's our job to come in and set those expectations and let the organization know that it's not always about moving as fast as we can. And I mean, I've had plenty of executives that have asked me about something as fundamental as life cycle stages. You know, hey, we're going to build it. It'll take 3 months from where we are today to when it's live, and then we can start collecting data. And then we're going to revisit this in 6 to 12 months, and we'll probably make some changes. And then they'll ask, so we're paying you to build something now that you're then going to change or fix later. Why not just build it right the first time? But the reality is that if you have that mindset, then we would never have a new iPhone. We would never have new innovation in any product. You build, you get data, and you iterate. And it's a part of the process. It's part of business growth.
So true. Yeah. And you're right. It's setting expectations. That's what has to happen again at the front end. It's why the start of the adoption process is so important. Set expectations. Yeah, I can get it off the ground this quickly, but no, it's not going to be effective until I've monitored and I've checked for adoption and it's really being used. And that bleeds into the final letter, which is the N, which is in the way that I've written it out, at least, normalize. So what do I mean here? I mean that now that I've had that feedback, and there is overlap here, no doubt, but now that I've had that feedback, how am I making this change a natural part of what I do on a day-to-day basis? This is a shift from this is new and I have to go do it to, oh, this is just what I do every day. Like it's as normal for me as turning on my computer in the morning. Right? It's as normal for me as taking a lunch break. It's just what I do. Well, I hope taking a lunch break is what you do. But it is the process of making it part of culture, and that comes from whoever holds these roles, these change management roles, not forgetting about it themselves and making a point to ask about it. So if there's a particular behavior that I want to see happen, I need to tell you why. Yes, I need to train you on how to do it. Yes, I need to incentivize you in doing it, but I also need to follow up. I also need to check in. I also need to continuously manage. Not micromanage. This is not micromanagement, but this is attention. You're demonstrating how valuable and important this is by focusing on it on a recurring basis. And that again will look different depending on the change that you've made, but it is baking it into culture. I know that if this is a change that we've agreed to, I know that I'm going to be asked questions about it and about whether I've adhered to that change or not later.
And I think that to the point of normalization, I mean, we see it often where sales forecasting as a pretty common example in the industry. If it's not being done at an organization, or at least not done natively with forecast categories of forecast properties in HubSpot as it's out of the box, more or less meant to be done, the adoption curve on that tends to be pretty steep historically, where a strategist might go in, roll out the setup for forecast categories within, let's say, maybe 3 weeks. And then all of a sudden it's being given to sales managers and sales reps. And then we say, great, now go incorporate this in your weekly stand up or however you want to. And following this framework, I think if we apply that same exact example, you would begin earlier in the process with discussing with the stakeholders. What does this look like? How do you want to use it? Is it going to be in weekly stand-ups, or are reps going to send you an end of week email? Whatever they need. And then you carry it through the steps to the end so that by the time this is live, it's not, I hope they're looking at this dashboard, but it's, I know they're bought into how this is going to help them to generate more sales.
100%. Yeah. Yep. If they're bought in, this normalization piece isn't that difficult. So if you've done it right at the start, the end is not hard. Yeah. 100%.
It certainly makes me go back and want to redo many epics that I've done over the many years that we've been doing this. But I would ask you a question then. So we have this framework, and I think it applies beautifully where we can say that it begins with documentation. And again, for those who are listening, we'll share a template that you can download and use as a resource. It's something that we use for helping to enable and facilitate change management. But Pete, if you had a junior strategist who came in and didn't have a whole lot of context, but just said, I'm really struggling with getting my people to adopt what I'm building, what should I be thinking about? Where should I start? What advice would you give them?
I would say don't listen to the last hour of talk and what I've said, and begin somewhere else entirely. I'm obviously joking, but the most important piece for anybody who's looking to grow adoption of whatever it is they build is first to build relationships. Everything that we talked about hinges on having a relationship with the people that are both asking for the change and enacting the change. And there's no magic to it. There's no there's lots of books out there about how to persuade and how to win friends and influence people, etc., etc., etc. But in reality, it's just about being a good person. If you are empathetic, vulnerable, and can have conversations that breed trust, you're going to build a relationship with the stakeholders, and this whole adoption process changes. It swivels from something that is hard to do and becomes something that is almost fun and exciting as a process. So that would be my one piece of advice. Is like one of the things I love about Rev Partners is that we have these. There's this little notification that goes out once a week on a Monday. Your virtual coffee buddy is whoever. And so today this week I got paired with somebody, and I had my virtual coffee with them for 15 minutes just before this call. And that is something that you can do in your own organization, across organizations, just intentional time with people to build relationship. Work aside, like everyone, I think, again, maybe I shouldn't be so categorical. Not everyone, but lots of people would appreciate you reaching out and saying, hey, I want to get to know you a bit. I want to have coffee if it's a remote environment, right? I want to just understand who you are. And that is good in and of itself. It's also great for you and your role and helping to push adoption.
And building relationships is a really, really good piece of advice, especially given that this show, this whole podcast is intended to help people become better HubSpot admin. And it was born out of what I've seen where the HubSpot community is so willing to help one another. We have Sprocketeer. It's the community in Slack. It's totally free and you can join. There's the link in the show notes. But I mean, it's amazing to see we have coffee chats that have been done in there. And also just how willing people are to meet with one another and help with one another. And again, it's totally free, but you could go in there and say, I'm rolling X project out. I'm having issues with adoption. How would you handle this? What have other people done or seen to tackle this? And the community will jump in and help. And it all starts with just building relationships and seeing what other people are doing and bringing your personality to this. Because I think your advice was spot on to say that you hold value, to say that we are all, as HubSpot admin, people who can bring our personalities into the role. We don't just need to be someone who's in the background building workflows. We can actually take the human element to what we're doing on a day-to-day. And that's impactful. It's really powerful to see.
Love that.
Pete, thank you so much for joining for the episode today. Change management, again, it's a big word. It can be a scary thing to think about having to change behavior, or on the flip side, to roll something out and not be able to change behavior. But it is really, really important to be able to begin that process early on, and having that adoption framework with articulate, discuss, onboard, provision, track, incentivize, optimize, normalize. Very powerful stuff. So thank you for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure, man. Thank you.
And for those who are tuning in, maybe for the first time, you can check out all of our previous episodes on YouTube or Spotify. So if you found this helpful, we'll be dropping a link in the show notes. We're also going to be dropping the link to the template that we have for how Pete and I help to empower change management when we're rolling out various epics and projects. So you're welcome to download that. And for those of you who enjoyed this episode, make sure you tune in again. We stream Fridays at 10:30 a.m. Central Standard Time, and each week we bring on a member of the Sprocketeer community. Pete, thank you. And for all of you Sprocketeers out there,
thank you for tuning into the Sprocket Pod podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode with your co-hosts, Cameron Collins and Mark Lerner. Be sure to catch us live every week on LinkedIn, and don't forget to subscribe to our episodes on YouTube and Spotify. If you found this episode valuable, please leave a review and share it with others looking to get more from HubSpot. Until next time, keep driving success with your CRM, and as always, Sprocket on.